well, I'm very short with introductions, but I will say that this next presenter is somebody that is very special to me because um, she teaches me more than what she'll ever know. Every time I get to hear her speak, and um, more importantly, she finds new ways of connecting information that I have no idea where it comes from, but she illuminates it for me. So with that being said, I just want to introduce to you the our organizing rep out of Florida, Emily Gorman. She will present the accountability framework to you all. Thank you.
Hey folks, happy Saturday. Thank you so much for having me today. A big shout out to Laura Comer for running my slides in the background, and a big thank you to Chad for that glowing introduction. I'm going to talk today about two tools that the National Ready for 100 campaign has released, and we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of accountability. So when you've gone through the campaign work to get a city or a county committed to 100% clean and renewable energy, then comes the important part of holding them accountable to those goals. Also want to take a quick pause here to remind everybody about the Ready for 100 Activist Toolkit. If you have not seen the Activist Toolkit, you are going to be amazed. For those folks who are considering starting the campaign to commit to 100% clean and renewable energy, or exploring what that work might look like, please make sure that you get on our website and read through that Activist Toolkit. Check it out. We got a lot of great resources there. And Laura, whenever you're ready, we're going to move to the next slide. So the tools I'm going to share with you today, the 100% accountability guide and the accountability framework, come out of a cohort that started in 2019. We brought together a whole bunch of frontline leaders from around the country. We brought some municipal staff from committed cities and industry experts to Miami, Florida, got them in a room together and asked them, okay, how do we make sure that implementation of these goals is accountable? How do we make sure it's happening in a timely manner? How do we make sure it's happening in a way that advances equity and justice in our communities, right? That it's getting economic impacts, that we're getting health benefits, that we're bringing good wage paying jobs to our cities. And so this is a picture of the cohort that gathered in Miami. You can see all of us in our big smiling faces there. Laura, if we could move to the next slide, please. So the question that we started with was, what is accountability? And I invite you to go ahead and jump into the chat box and share what you think your definition of accountability might be. Merriam-Webster tells us that it is a synonym for responsible, but there are a couple important elements of accountability. When we practice accountability in movements, when we practice accountability in cities and in counties, there's four important components to this. One is evaluation. Measuring where we are in the process and where we're trying to go. And thank you, Kathy. Keep those definitions rolling in. Share what you're thinking in the chat box. Another important element is transparency, right? We want to have access to this information. We want to be clear across all parties, what's happening, when it's happening, how it's happening. Another important element here is relationships, right? We talk about mutual accountability, we talk about mutual reciprocity. What we're talking about there is relationships. Not just saying what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, but being able to communicate freely when things change, when plans need to shift. And we also talk about improvement. Improvement is the idea that not only are we on track, but we're getting better at what we're doing, right? We're becoming more in line with our values. We're getting deeper into the specific strategies. We're thinking about how our practice improves over time. And Laura, I'll ask you to share the next slide with us. A very quick little video from our accountability cohort. This is about a minute and a half on why accountability is important for the clean energy movement.
City and state governments across the country are making pledges to go 100% renewable energy. We're here in Florida building a shared framework of what an equitable 100% pledge looks like, and how people can hold their governments and decision makers accountable.
There are a lot of communities, just like my own, who have been systematically left out of the clean energy economy. Accountability means, to me, like, do what you say you'll do.
Accountability for me means the ability to hold oneself and or others responsible for their actions and behaviors.
Clean energy is important to me because this is about the future of human survival.
Clean energy is important to me because I am a second generation immigrant Asian American woman, and I want to include my communities in this vision of being able to access and be deserving of and to be viable to having clean energy.
Renewable energy is really our best shot at preserving our natural heritage here on Earth and building a peaceful and safe world for our children and grandchildren.
Thank you so much, Laura. Yeah, so some perspectives on accountability and why it's important in the clean energy movement. I want to remind folks that we are operating inside of the just transition lens and the just transition framework. This is a big complicated graphic. Don't get too lost in it. I am going to share in the chat box the Climate Justice Alliance Just Transition Principles. This is the foundation of the concept, just transition. I invite you to read that. The most important pillars to remember here is that when we're talking about a just transition, we're talking about a community-wide economic shift. There are three primary pillars to that. One is resources. So the way that we think about our natural resources, the way that we manage our resources, the way that we measure resources. One is work. So thinking about our labor, thinking about the value of our work, the culture of our work, the way that we manage our time, the way that we price our time, the things that we receive in our labor. And the third is culture. So culture being the fundamental beliefs, practices, principles, and values that are passed down across generations. And that's really the source of our economic framework, of our economic structure, comes from our cultural system, our belief system. So when we think about just transition, we're thinking about working inside of those three pillars to move from the present moment, which is an extractive economy, into a living economy. And the principle there is regeneration, right? The idea that we need respect and reciprocity to start to regrow the world around us. So again, I invite you to dive into the Climate Justice Alliance Just Transition Principles, but this is the foundational framework, the philosophy behind the accountability framework. Wanted to share that background with you. Laura, if you would move to the next slide for us. So in practice, what this means for our governments, for our cities, for our counties, for our municipal leaders, is moving from a place of informing people to a place of deferring to our community members. This is a scheme that we call collaborative governance. This particular framework comes from Providence, Rhode Island. And you'll see there's a couple of steps here. It's not going to happen overnight that you can get your city from A to D, right? But they're going to move through this process. So right now they might be informing you of what their climate goals are. They might be telling you, oh, hey, we're going to do this thing. We want to get to the point from there that they're consulting you, right? That they're hearing ideas about how to advance climate action, that they're getting some information about what your priorities are. The next step there is to involve you, right? Ensuring that your community's needs and assets are integrated into the process. So not just checking in, but really building the suggestions, the solutions, the ideas from community members into the plans itself. From there, we try to get to collaborate. The idea that community members are playing a leadership role in advancing climate action, right? The way that we're implementing our transition to 100% clean and renewable energy, the way that we're implementing our emissions reduction strategies, whether that's transportation or electricity, or natural resource management or waste, right? We want to be collaborating on how we're getting that done. From there, ultimately, we want to move to defer to. This is the ultimate form of democratic participation in which community members, residents are the primary thought leaders on how we implement our transition to 100% clean and renewable energy. We say that the folks closest to the problem have the most solutions. And so we need to put them in the driver's seat, right? We need the folks who are closest to the problem to be leading the solutions. And that's when we get to defer to. Laura, if you would share our next slide. I want to point out this table to you, very useful, also from Providence, Rhode Island, the same scale that I just laid out for you, but they have a way to measure themselves. Highly encourage you to take the slide, try to measure yourself. I heard Kathy in the chat box saying, I think Columbus is in consult, maybe involve. Please go ahead and think about where your city is and how you can start to take the next step of more participatory collaborative governance. And our next slide, please. So with that in mind, with that framework, with those set of goals, we created the 100% shared accountability framework. The accountability framework is a measurement and evaluation tool to build mutual accountability. What that means is that there are a series of categories that you will grade yourself and your city on. And then you use that grading process to start to build relationships, transparency, collaboration with your government. And there's a couple different ways to think about using your framework. This is something that you can use independently as a campaign team, something that you can use collaboratively with your city staff. It's also something that a body within your city government or county government could use themselves. So for example, a climate justice accountability task force, if you have an existing climate group, climate advisory group, clean energy advisory group, this is a tool that they can start to use right away. And the goal here is that cities know the score. Where are you in your transition to 100% renewable energy? And not just in terms of a percentage of your electricity, but in terms of all of the benefits that we want to see for our citizens through this transition, right? Health benefits, economic benefits, democratic participation benefits. We're trying to build the future in our homes right now. And so where are we in that process? How are we doing? This is fundamentally centered around a process. So as I mentioned, it's a grading tool, but the basis that grading tool sits in is a 12-step process, and that's where the guide comes in. Laura, if you would share our next slide. So the shared accountability guide, one, most importantly, teaches folks how to use the framework. It goes over each of the important sections. It gives case studies and samples of what those different sections might be. But there's also a 12-step process for establishing the body that would use this accountability guide. And so you remember when we were talking about collaborative governance and moving towards that point of deferring to, some folks have built the bodies in their government that would do that, and some folks have not. I would say most folks, in my experience so far, has not. Down here in Miami-Dade County, we are working with our county government to establish a climate justice accountability task force that will use this framework. And so we use the guide and the 12 steps within the guide to help us build that body. So it starts with thinking about your structure and your collaborators. Who are these groups going to be? How are decisions going to be made? Right, then we get into a collaboration. We do a timeline and a map of our energy use to give us that background information. Then we dive deep into the framework. We think about our goals, our metrics, our deadlines, and then we start using it on a regular basis. We're recording process. We're checking back in. We're reporting on at least an annual basis. As part of the framework, we identify responsible parties, the people, whether they're in the room or not, who are in charge of getting that done. And that's an important part of accountability. We need to know who is responsible for these different areas. There's also a very useful energy justice score. I encourage you to take a deep dive into the guide and learn what the energy justice score is. A lot of folks, when they try to use the framework, get lost in that category. But there's a really nice description and a kind of like a practice worksheet you can use in the guide to help you work that part of the framework. And again, we're trying to move from a status quo where we have bold commitments, right? Strong aspirational climate action with very little change in the power dynamics. People who are not working towards collaborative governance, but are rather informing their citizens of how they're going to take climate action. And that's leading us to weak, slow, and inequitable implementation. What I mean by that is that we are not moving fast enough to address the climate crisis. We are not thinking about our strategies in a way that bring peripheral benefits to our residents, benefits like improved air quality, economic, high-paying jobs, strong, thriving local energy economy, efficiency moves. We're not doing the whole body transition, and that's what this guide is trying to change, right? We want to take the levels of power, the folks who are presently making decisions and informing citizens, and start to build mutual accountability with those folks directly with our citizens, our frontline community members, so that we have consistent communication, we have transparency, we have relationships, we have a mechanism to evaluate through the framework. And that's what's going to bring us to strong, consistent, and equitable implementation. That's what's going to get us to the just transition towards 100% clean and renewable energy economy that does regenerate our nation. So Laura, if you'd share next slide, please. This is a sample of the accountability framework. This is the grading tool itself. You're going to see on the left-hand side categories. It starts with clean and renewable energy, goes on to economic benefits, to health benefits. There are two levels here, one for aspirational goals, things that we're hoping to achieve, and one for existing goals, things that we already have on the book. We then move into specific milestones, the short-term timelines that we're trying to get us towards those goals. And we move into the progress to date, right? What have we done towards that milestone? How's it going? Then we name the responsible party. Who is the person who needs to get that work done? Then we move to the energy justice score. That is the piece that I told you we need to look at the sample in the guide, because a lot of people get stuck on this. Highly encourage you that you work through the guide portion of that. And then we envision what success looks like in 1 year from now. Thank you, Laura. I think you may have just dropped the link that I was going to pop in here, but this here is our guide. Now you got it twice. And our framework. So I know that was a lot of information very quickly. Again, I encourage you to use the activist toolkit for campaigning, and then to move into the guided framework as you start to move in implementation in your cities and counties. I would be happy to take some questions if anybody's got some they'd like to ask.
Okay, I'm going to be selfish and I'm going to ask the first question. So for a city that is looking to get their, for a campaign that's looking to get their city more engaged on the accountability framework, what would you say is the first, first three steps that campaign should go about?
So the first and most important step is to try to map the power in your community right now. Who is making decisions? How are those decisions being made? Where are they on the ladder, if you will, of collaborative governance? Are they informing citizens? Are they collaborating with citizens? Are they deferring to citizens? We want to try and get to the point that we are deferring to. So we need to get a map of power first. After that, I recommend that folks jump into thinking about the structure. So who do you want to be using this tool? Does that exist in city government or county government or state government? Does that exist as an independent body outside of there where people are coming together? So structure, and that's going to bring you then to think about your membership criteria. Who needs to be at that table? what is the bare minimum to participate in this space? Because the name of the game here is shifting power and bringing power out of the hands of people who currently have it into the folks who are most impacted by the energy system right now.
Thank you. We do have a question in the chat. You are focusing, and it moved very quickly. I believe it was focusing on cities, but how do we basically how do we plan on stopping the state from its preemptive strikes and attacks on clean energy? And I do apologize for butchering. I'm not the best in reading as we go along here.
Preemption. So we have we deal with a lot of preemption in Florida. As much as I hate to say it, this is also about building power. State governments need to know that city leaders and local leaders are watching them and that they have expectations for the way that climate action is going to progress. Here in Florida, we just went through a legislative round that was extremely difficult. And so we had a number of preemption bills come up and we did not have the power to stop them. We have a heavily conservative state government. And so what we focused on was changing the nature of those preemption bills to make them a little bit easier for us to live with, right? So focusing on specific word changes in the preemption bills that were proposed so that they would be easier for us to work with in the future. But truly long term, what you need to do is think about the power that you've built in your state and your ability to mobilize through elections, through the legislative session, and to build power for the decision makers at your state government.
Absolutely. We have another question. How can the accountability framework be used while people are trying to get their city to commit?
I recommend that folks use the accountability framework to think about their resolutions. So there are some categories inside of the framework that I think you should bake right into your resolution, right? You should be thinking about economic benefits. You should be thinking about health benefits. There are samples that you can use from other cities inside of the guide that will help you craft some of that language, but you want to start to bake that stuff right in there. The other thing I recommend is thinking about who the implementation bodies are. We talk about having a funded planning process as part of commitments, but I would go a step further and start to think about who are the people who are going to oversee the implementation and the transition to 100% clean and renewable energy. Can you bake in right now frontline leadership to your commitment?
This is part of the reason why I said I enjoy listening to Emily every time. Okay, and we have another question. If you already shared and just moved on me, if you already shared that and I missed it, what cities are you working with on this accountability at this time? So I'm going to actually take a stab at that here in Ohio, and Cleveland and Columbus are the main cities for Ohio. And I'm going to let Emily say whatever cities she may be working with, because we learn by having this collective effort from not just within the state, but also across the country.
Yeah, so here in Miami-Dade County, I'm an organizer in Miami, Florida. I focus on Miami-Dade County. So we're working exclusively with that body because they encompass 36 cities within the area. They're kind of like the biggest umbrella regional government for us. Also Atlanta and Chicago was considering it for a while. Atlanta's been working with the framework as well. But I also want to flag Providence, Rhode Island has a really good framework for thinking about this. Also, Madison, Wisconsin has a good framework. And we've taken a lot of the membership criteria structure, like the way you think about who belongs on that board, from Portland, Oregon, actually, and their clean energy fund out there.
Awesome. Are there any other questions? I'm going to ask one more time, last call for questions. We have one more. Can you explain a bit about the Portland Clean Energy Fund? Great question.
Gladly, yeah. Also recommend that you reach out to the organizers in Portland. They are really accessible, really friendly. I'm sure they'll be happy to talk to you. I just dropped the link for the Portland Clean Energy Fund in the chat box. But basically what that is the concept is that they put a 1% gross sales tax on major corporations who have operations in Portland. So Walmart's, Amazon's, Starbucks's, folks whose corporation makes more than $1 million annually and they have a location in Portland. There's a 1% sales tax on their gross receipts. That 1% is collected into a fund called the Portland Clean Energy Fund. The purpose of the Portland Clean Energy Fund is to advance clean and renewable energy explicitly in frontline communities. And they went so far as to name who those communities are. I could not name them because they're based on geographic locations and streets. It's like between 72nd and 83rd. It's very specific to Portland. But in addition to the fund itself, they built a leadership body. So they have a group of folks who some are technical experts, some are frontline folks from specific neighborhoods, some are activists. And those people as a body give out the money. So they take the sales funds, the Portland Clean Energy Fund, and they give it out as grants to specific groups in order to build clean and renewable energy in frontline neighborhoods.
Thank you. And please look at the chat. Some great information has been shared in the chat. I'm going to take the last few moments here to just say thank you again. The accountability framework for me has been a major shift in how I think about the work that I do, not just in Cleveland, but help to support around the state with the Ready for 100 campaigns. And your explanation helps simplify it a little bit more for me each time, because when I first got the accountability framework, my mind was everywhere with it, because it is a very big document and is very intensive. But these sessions really help, and I really do appreciate you taking time out on a Saturday to come and speak with us about it. So with that being said, I'm going to ask Kathy or Laura, who's been, well, before I get to Kathy, I just really want to take this time out right now to say thank you so much to Laura Comer for being our tech guru today. A lot of the behind the scenes stuff and a lot of the switching that you've seen happen today is because of Laura and her expertise in making not just this conference run smoothly, but to really keep me in line and help everything else happen. So I really appreciate you for all of what you've done for us today and how you've been instrumental in making Ohio a successful place for Ready for 100 and its fertility to grow as a not just the multitude of campaigns that have sprung up here in the state, but the wonderful instruction and help that you give to all of our volunteers. I can't say it enough, but thank you so very much for all of your support. With that said, I am going to turn it back over to Kathy, and we are going to go into this next section. And yay.